Hello Internet, welcome back to Tromsø Twilight, the channel where I, Vincent, talk to you, the ever-expanding universe, about books, movies, music I enjoy, find interesting, or a combination of the two. Today we're going to be talking about an interesting cultural artifact from 2004, this book and compilation CD, The Future Dictionary of America. This is a very unique book. It's also a kind of time capsule, cultural artifact of a political moment in 2004, and also of a cultural milieu, a particular type of style of creating culture at that time. I was working in a bookshop in 2004. That's the only reason I know about this and the reason that I have it. In order to really understand this book, you have to put it in the context of the time it was released. So George W. Bush, also known as George Bush Jr., was first elected in the year 2000. Year 2001 is when the September the 11th attacks on the World Trade Center in New York occurred. And so already by 2003, he had initiated the invasion of Iraq, which was more or less a secular dictatorship in the Middle East that had nothing to do with Al-Qaeda, having already started a ground invasion of Afghanistan. So all of this happened in the space of 3 years. And in 2004, at the height of the Iraq conflict, with people out on the streets protesting against it, the world becoming increasingly destabilized in a way that we've been living with ever since, George W. Bush stood for re-election as the American president. And a group of writers and musicians came together to create this object as a sort of protest and as a fundraiser. Now, the Future Dictionary of America was initiated by some people who were involved with the McSweeney publishing house. And then I think Spike Jones, together with a member of We Might Be Giants, got together 22 musicians and bands to donate to the Future Soundtrack of America, which was a CD of songs released separately and within this book. In addition to these 22 bands and musicians, the editors also managed to get a whole host of best-selling authors at the time to contribute definitions to this dictionary of the future, and also some illustrators. So, for example, Art Spiegelman, who created the iconic graphic novel Mouse about the Holocaust, he has some definitions in this book along with some illustrations. Stephen King has one definition. Others that you might have heard of are T.C. Boyle, Jeffrey Eugenides, ZZ Packer is in here, Joyce Carol Oates is in here. Who else do I know? Chris Ware, probably one of the reasons that I bought it. Paul Auster. So the whole thing is a kind of language game where writers are invited to contribute imaginary definitions to a dictionary of the future, and in that way say something about the world at the time or the world of the future. And in this way, the book becomes a time capsule of what the country and the world were like at the time it was created, the concerns of the people creating this protest against George W. Bush and the neoconservative movement, and also how they imagined the future at the time. They were doing all of this for free, and the proceeds were donated to grassroots organizations working for progressive causes at a time that seemed very precarious. Now, this book's out of print today, so what I would like to do is share with you some of the definitions that I think are interesting and talk about what they might mean, how we might understand them, and then at the end I'll talk about the music as well. So I think that the definitions can be roughly grouped into three categories, and the first one I would say, which are maybe my favorites, are the kind of optimistic and utopian definitions. Many of these are kind of redefinitions of existing words. So two that I really like are by a writer called Nick Flynn, who wrote a really excellent memoir that came out the same year called, and this is a great title for a book, Another Bullshit Night in Suck City. It was about his relationship to his homeless alcoholic father. And he contributes two definitions to this book. I'm just going to find them. The first one is homelessness. Adjective, archaic, lacking a home. The second definition he contributes, maximum wage, brackets 2005, so the year after this book came out. Noun, the highest wage paid or permitted to be paid, usually set at 7 to 10 times the minimum wage. I just think in those two definitions he says something really kind of smart and simple about the way society is organised and the way that it could be organised. Two similar definitions, which are quite thought-provoking, are for the words elderly and the words marriage. So I'll come back to marriage, but elderly, the definition is thus. Age group considered to be wise, sexy, and all the way round revered, respected, imitated, and admired. Adjective, wise and sexy. Yo, that chick is mad elderly. Elizabeth Crane. And then there are two definitions of marriage, but the one I really like is Ryan Boudinot's definition, which is marriage, noun, 1, the state in which two people are united for the purpose of living together and with certain legal rights and obligations towards each other. 2, the act or ceremony of being married. And the example is, Margaret and Julie had a fabulous marriage with all their friends and relatives in attendance to celebrate their union. And I read this when I was preparing this video and I was like, what? That definition is weird. That is the definition of marriage. And then it hit me. In 2004, it was not. A couple of other utopian ones that I enjoy. Wildcatting by A.G. Pasquella. The definition of this is a tactic used by extreme environmentalists that calls for constructing wildlife refuges on top of offshore oil drilling platforms. Example, load the gazelles into the truck, Ma. Susie and I are going wildcatting. Just one more from the more optimistic side of things is from Jeffrey Eugenides, Anti-Imperiology. Noun, the study of imperial development from onset to decline, especially with the intent to reverse or avoid archetypal historical processes. The second category that I can see are definitions that are more clearly satirical. They're either critiquing the world that the dictionary was created within, or they are making a more obvious political point. An example here, mistake, spelt like beefsteak, flesh of a cow, beef derived from slaughtered animals, Jonathan Franzen. Then you have Ken Foster's definition of report, an exchange of gunfire frequently between military troops and the people whose country they seek to occupy. 2, an account of such gunfire frequently censored or inaccurate. Now a longer one, which is even more biting, is from Stephen Elliott, and you have to remember that this book was created right at the beginning of the War on Terror, shortly after the Patriot Act was signed. And this is the definition of terrorism. 1, the unlawful use or threatened use of force or violence by a person or an organized group against people or property with the intention of intimidating or coercing societies or governments, often for ideological or political reasons. This is from the American Heritage Dictionary. 2, cheating on a test. Example, 60 of the 62 international terrorists, according to a March story in the Philadelphia Inquiry, turned out to be Middle Eastern students who had cheated on a test. Specifically, they had paid others to take an English proficiency exam required for college or graduate school. 3, unionization of educational employees. Education Secretary Rob Page called the National Education Association, the nation's largest teachers' union, a terrorist organization. 4, a government unaligned with America. George Bush sent an ultimatum to the world's leaders today. You are either with us or you are with the terrorists. 5, drug trafficking. Drug czar Hutchinson said Tuesday, it's clear there is not really a distinction between the drug traffickers and the terrorist organizations. See also Drug War, Taft-Hartley Act, Political Violence. It's quite chilling to read this because it's setting the groundwork 22 years ago for much of what we've seen happen in the last year and a half. The great Kurt Vonnegut also contributed a definition, Rumsfeld, noun, one who can stomach casualties. For those who are too young to know, Rumsfeld was the Secretary of Defense at the time. Stephen King also contributed a definition to this book, the word slooge. Noun, the hours of analysis, usually on high cable news networks, which follows breaking news, i.e. events which have just happened, and which usually, but not always, follow the high cable news dictum, if it bleeds, it leads. Most slooge occurs around shiny tables, where overweight white men talk about such things as the liberal conspiracy, fiscal responsibility, and isolationist policies of revisionism. Expert speakers of slooge were paid millions of dollars in the early years of the 21st century, not just to wag their double chins on television, but to give speeches and write books. The president's press conference was followed by over 3 hours of slooge on MSNBC and 6 hours of slooge on Fox TV. There is a subtle use of the past tense in this one, making it maybe slightly less pessimistic. He's suggesting that this is obsolete by the time this dictionary was published. And just to give you a little booster, here is a comic image from Art Spiegelman that follows Stephen King's entry of the smoking jacket, a jacket created for people to smoke inside. One more that kind of falls into this category before we move on to the last category, just because I like it a lot. It's one of my favorites. Hell's Librarians. Early 21st century organization of librarians who refused on principle to comply with the long since repealed Patriot Act. These librarians distinguished themselves by obfuscating library records to prevent federal officers from discerning patrons' reading patterns. Over time, Hell's librarians eschewed the typical understated garb favoured by their profession and started wearing more leather jackets and even chaps in some instances. Here's a little picture of Hell's librarians. The third category is kind of fanciful, playful neologisms, and an example of this might be Benjamin Cohen's Serpico, which is the name of the film, or the character Serpico has finally come into currency to just describe somebody extremely cool. And then there's SRV Afterlife, Stevie Ray Vaughan Afterlife. Let me just find that one. DC Berman, this one is. A no longer practiced funerary service where the expired customer's soul was stored on an abandoned Stevie Ray Vaughan webpage, a webpage expected to drift for eternity through cyberspace like a ghost ship. I feel like that has almost like a Philip K. Dick kind of quality to it. Lynn Tillman has one that I think maybe we can all start to use, which is an adjective, catful, a human being whose behaviour is reminiscent of a playful or contented cat. Shelley Jackson also has some fun and quite strange ones. For example, backtalk. Verb 1. To talk back time. Reverse the directionality of time through guided stuttering. 2. To talk inward, sucking your breath back through your vocal cords. 3. To address the dead by such talk. 4. Noun. Instances of such talk. In the middle of the book there are some beautiful illustrations, and my favourite is a pretty weird abstract comic strip from Chris Ware, who did Building Stories, and this is great. Price of admission comic strip. So then we have the music, and I find this super interesting because this is from a time where kind of white indie rock was still considered to be the dominant cultural force for like progressive, cool literary types. So the makeup of the music on this CD in this book is very much of a particular time, place, style, and cultural vibe, and I just do not think it would be like that if they did something equivalent today. It's a collection of rarities or unique contributions. At the time that it was released, most of this stuff was not available elsewhere, and it starts, for example, with OK Go, This Will Be Our Year. It's kind of optimistic opening track, and then I'm not going to go through all of them by any means, but I'm just going to talk about some of the ones I like or find interesting. It's got Blink 182, I Miss You, James Guthrie mix. And Blink 182 were not a band I really liked apart from a couple of their singles. I never had any of their albums. But this particular track has always been one of my favourites by them because it's a little bit more earnest, it's a little bit more open-hearted, it's a very melodic, beautiful pop tune, and this particular rendition of it that's not as upbeat, it's a little bit more spacey, gives me like a real nostalgic feeling to listen to today. There's a rare track from Sleater Kinney on here, Off With Your Head. Fantastic, like most Sleater Kinney stuff. There's an REM song, and then after like a lot of these kind of white indie rock contributions, suddenly the only kind of hip hop R&B adjacent artist who shows up, unbelievably enough, is will.i.am from the Black Eyed Peas. I mean, this isn't as weird as it might immediately sound, because Black Eyed Peas, when they first came out, were a conscious hip hop collective. I actually really liked their first album and was completely confused when they got together with Fergie and started doing like My Humps and stuff. And this track actually has an extremely cool beat with live brass on it. It's sort of a musical relief when it comes, and it's also still a little conscious. It's just kind of about capitalism. A real highlight is a track called Tippecanoe and Tyler 2, which it says in the booklet is a war song, like a traditional folk song from the 1800s, kind of a protest song. And this version is done by They Might Be Giants. And then another highlight, which comes shortly after it, is a track called The Ballad of David Icke by Clem Snide. And this is really interesting to hear today because it's an a cappella folk song sung from the perspective of David Icke, or a David Icke believer who believes that the secret rulers of the world have taken his girl away, because her heart was pure. It's a sort of song of grief about the New World Order kidnapping his girlfriend. And it was such a novelty at the time, and it seems so strange now to hear it with, QAnon and the way that conspiracy theories have just blossomed throughout the world. Fountains of Wayne are also on here, and I used to really love Fountains of Wayne as a teenager. This is an acoustic version of their song Everything Is Ruined. Strangely, it doesn't hit me in the heart the way the Blink-182 song does. There's a cover of Sam Stone by John Prine, the country song, also a kind of anti-war or a song about the way veterans are treated, and this is contributed by Laura Cantrell. And then the last song that I want to talk about that's on this CD is Tom Waits has a contribution, which is The Day After Tomorrow. This is actually one of the only songs on here that wasn't rare at the time the CD came out and the book came out, and that's because it was on his album from that year, Real Gone. But it's still very interesting because Tom Waits, for most of his career, never really did protest songs. He didn't do political music. His music was maybe implicitly political in as much as it was often about the underdog. It was often about outcasts in society, the working class, the impoverished. But here he's writing a song from the perspective of a 21-year-old soldier posted overseas, waiting to come home, and it's his birthday, and he's missing his family, he's missing his home, he's missing very simple things about his hometown. And he states very clearly his perspective that he's not fighting for freedom or justice, he's fighting to stay alive, and that he realizes that the people that he's fighting against are not his enemies, and that they pray to the same God that he does. So I hope it's been interesting to you to hear about the Future Dictionary of America if you didn't know about it. And if you had it or you have it, maybe it's reminded you about it, because I'd almost forgotten it until I just noticed it on my shelf the other day, and I was thinking how timely it was to return to it. It was pretty sad at the time because I got this, and I was encouraged by it. It was all of these creative, artistic people voicing their protest against what the George Bush administration and the neoconservatives were doing at home in America and in the Middle East, and what the United Kingdom were participating in alongside them. And then shortly after I got it, George W. Bush was re-elected. Then I remember listening to a Bill Hicks routine about how much he hated George Bush, and kind of crying and laughing at the same time, because this Bill Hicks routine was from the 90s and it was talking about Bush Senior, and it was the same thing happening again. And it was very disillusioning at the time. And I'm reminded now that between George Bush and the current political situation, there was 10 years, 12 years of optimism, and that within that time, the definition of marriage changed to be in line with this book. And I'm also thinking about how today, you would never have a CD like this because they would have made an effort to have included more people who were not white boys with guitars. So some things have changed, some things have not. And I just thought maybe you might want to hear about this book. So I guess that's it for today. Look after yourself, look after the people you love, and I'll see you soon.